The Supreme Court judgment on demonetization policy made the TV headlines yesterday. That was the lead newspaper story in the morning today. Let's ask ourselves, did this judgment carry any meaning after 6 years the policy was implemented in this country? What did we expect from a Supreme Court which sat over the case for 6 years, which let the country go through a turmoil all these years, and then sat down to complete a formality? Wasn't this just a formality? Well, it was a split judgment, a 4-1 judgment at that. But how did that matter? The majority judgment upheld the monetization policy and gave a clean chit to the government and the RBI. And what did the minority judgment do? The minority judgment by Justice B.B. Nagaratna declared the process adopted by the government unlawful. But did that matter? No. She said that as 6 years have passed, nothing could be undone. So, the judgment is only a matter of record. Just take a hypothetical case. If the majority judgment would have declared government action unlawful, would it have changed anything? No. Because in that case too, the judges should have said the process could not be undone after 6 years. So the Supreme Court was just doing a formality. The government was sitting pretty, and perhaps it was smiling at the judges, telling them silently, Mr. Judges, you may decide to do anything you please. You cannot undo anything. You will make yourself a laughing stock. Either way, whether you give a verdict in favor or you give a verdict against. Actually, the Supreme Court of India has made itself a laughing stock. It can promptly sit on a Saturday to deny bail granted by a high court to a Delhi University professor who happens to be an accused in a crime that has not been established so far. But our esteemed Supreme Court has no time to look at the justiciability of a government move that ravaged the lives of millions of poor of this country. Our apex court has shown where its priorities lie. It would have been a foolhardy to expect any concrete outcome from this judgment, irrespective of the way this judgment went. The bottom line is very clear. This was an academic exercise. But my grouse then would be, if the Supreme Court did not do the academic exercise diligently, actually the apex court had the advantage of the hindsight. Hindsight of 6 years to look back and see how demonetization process actually played out. Both the majority and minority judgments keep reminding us in their judgment that the goals, the objectives behind demonetization policy were indeed noble. It was for the larger good. They say if individual interests were sacrificed for it, then so be it. In their scheme of things, an individual can be sacrificed at the altar of the quote-unquote public good. If 200 odd people died standing in the queue for hours to exchange their currency notes, so be it. What's a 200 number in a country of 135 crore people? If hundreds of thousands of the poor daily wages who earned in cash were rendered jobless because 86% of the cash went out of circulation for weeks and months, well, so be it. The government was, after all, aiming to strike at big causes, striking at the root of the black money and fake money. To achieve that kind of grandiose goal, if a few million poor people were left to scrounge for their survival, what a big deal. Nation's interest is paramount. And interests of these ordinary men and women can be sacrificed for the sake of our great nation. Well, individuals were sacrificed, no doubt. But then how far the goals were achieved? What goals? The goals for which millions had to go through hell. Let us recollect. Two prime goals of demonetization, as announced by our beloved Prime Minister on that fateful night, 8th November 2016. First, to eliminate black money, and second, to confiscate fake currency. Well, how much of black money was unearthed? The RBI stubbornly refused to disclose the data for months on end. Finally, it was forced to do so because of the RTI applications and some kind of judicial intervention. And what did it admit? More than 99% of the money that had been tendered illegal on that cataclysmic night returned to the treasury. It was not as if the rest 1% that did not return was actually black money that accrued to the exchequer. No. Many Indians could not exchange their old currency notes for new ones for a variety of reasons. Take one example. In fact, an old couple. In fact, they themselves were the petitioners in this case before the Supreme Court. What did they say? They said that they were visiting their son in the US. They had left behind 1,60,000 rupees in their house. They always kept that kind of cash at home for medical emergency reasons. In fact, they had their bank account. They showed to the court that their bank accounts to show that money had been withdrawn from the bank in the previous month. But when the demonetization was announced, they could not quickly get back to get the notes exchanged in time because the flight tickets from the US to India were very expensive that time. So they lost their money. 1,62,000 rupees of their legitimate money went down the drain. Did you read another story? The report in newspapers about how a Jawan serving in the front line in the Indian army had kept some cash in a trunk in his village home. He had kept that money for the emergency care of his old parents. He did not get leave. He could not return home to go to the bank to exchange those currency notes. He forfeited that money. We read reports how hundreds of people in far-flung areas in Nepal, who usually kept Indian currency, some amount of Indian currency, especially those who keep visiting India, found no way to exchange that money. Leave aside others. I myself discovered one 1,000 rupee note long after the deadline was over. My own brother gave me 1,000 rupee notes, asking me if I could exchange it in any bank. And that was almost a year after the process had been completed. You would hear thousands of such stories. Thousands of people who have kept those 500 rupee and 1,000 rupee notes preserved for posterity to show it to their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. All this money would certainly account for almost the whole of that 1% that was not deposited back in the bank. What did that mean? It meant our government set in motion a process, in fact the demonetization process, through which almost all black money turned white. Almost all fake money turned into legal tender. When these statistics stared the government in the face, it moved the goalpost. The Attorney General claimed before the Supreme Court that the demonetization helped much needed digitization process. It reduced cash GDP ratio, which was unusually high. If the honorable judges of the Supreme Court had a little patience to query further, they would have discovered how bogus a claim the AG was making. In fact, a Business Standard report today, mind you, today, bears before us how the chief law officer of the country was lying through his teeth before the apex court. What does the BS report say? Cash use has zoomed after 2016, after the demonetization. In 2011 to 2016 period, the amount of cash growth was only 12.2%. Between 2016 to 2021, the amount has gone up to 14.4%, which means it has gone up by a whopping 2%. That's not all. Business Standard tells us another startling fact which amounts to a slap on the face of the government lawyers. When demonetization happened, the high denomination notes accounted for 86.4%, and today it's 87.1%. What does that mean? Cash use has increased after 2016. Cash to GDP ratio has gone up after demonetization. The government officials could get away with bogus claims, with blatant lies, only because the Supreme Court refused to do due diligence. Supreme Court judges kept emphasizing that behind demonetization, the intentions of the government were good. Our honorable judges forgot that aphorism. The way to hell is paved with good intentions. Thank you.